There comes a moment in life when you realize that you have been explaining yourself far too much. Explaining why you made a decision. Explaining why you walked away. Explaining why you became quiet. Explaining why you changed. Explaining why you no longer accept certain behavior. And perhaps you believe that if you find the right words, if you explain yourself clearly enough, people will finally understand you. But here is the truth. Not everyone is trying to understand you. Some people are only trying to judge you. Some are trying to control you. Some have already decided who you are in their mind, and no explanation will change that. So stop exhausting yourself, trying to be understood by everyone. You do not need to defend every decision you make. You do not need to prove that your intentions were good. You do not need to convince someone that you are a good person. There is a different kind of strength that appears when you become comfortable with silence. Not the silence of fear, not the silence of weakness, but the silence of someone who knows who they are. When you know your values, you do not need to announce them constantly. When you know your direction, you do not need everyone to approve of it. And when you respect yourself, you begin to understand that your peace is more valuable than winning every argument. There will always be people who misunderstand you. Let them. There will always be people who question your choices. Let them question. There will always be people who create stories about you because they do not have access to your truth. Let them create their stories. Your responsibility is not to control what others think. Your responsibility is to control how you live, because the more you explain yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you, the more you abandon yourself. You give away your energy, you give away your attention, you give away your peace. And slowly you begin living according to other people's expectations instead of your own principles. Silence gives you that power back. It teaches you to pause before reacting. It teaches you that not every accusation deserves an answer. Not every opinion deserves your attention. Not every misunderstanding deserves a correction. And not every person deserves access to your deepest explanations. Sometimes the strongest response is no response at all. You simply continue walking. You continue building. You continue becoming. And eventually, your actions speak where your words could not. This is not about becoming cold. It is not about ignoring people. It is not about refusing to communicate. It is about knowing the difference between communication and justification. Communication creates understanding. Justification often comes from insecurity. And when you constantly feel the need to prove yourself, ask yourself one simple question. Who am I trying to convince? Because perhaps the person you need to convince is not them. Perhaps it is you. You need to trust yourself. You need to stand behind your decisions. You need to become so grounded within yourself that another person's misunderstanding no longer becomes a crisis inside your mind. The moment you stop explaining yourself unnecessarily, something changes. You become quieter, but strangely, you also become stronger. You stop chasing approval. You stop arguing for your worth. You stop trying to control every perception, and you begin to understand one of the deepest forms of self-respect. Sometimes you say nothing, not because you have nothing to say, but because you finally understand that your peace is worth more than being understood. One of the hardest things to learn is that you do not need everyone to approve of you. From a very young age, we are taught to seek approval. We learn to look at the faces around us before we decide whether we are doing something right. We want our parents to be proud, our friends to agree, our colleagues to respect us, and even strangers to see us in a positive way. Slowly, without realizing it, we begin to measure our decisions through the opinions of other people. And this is where your freedom begins to disappear. You make a decision, and immediately you think, what will they say? You change your behavior because someone might misunderstand you. You stay in situations that no longer serve you because you are afraid of disappointing someone. You continue explaining your choices because you cannot tolerate the possibility that another person might think badly of you. But ask yourself, how much of your life are you actually living for yourself? When you constantly seek approval, you hand control of your peace to other people. Their opinion becomes your emotional weather. If they praise you, you feel strong. If they criticize you, you begin to doubt yourself. If they understand you, you feel peaceful. If they misunderstand you, you feel the need to defend yourself. This is not freedom. Real self-respect begins when you understand that your life cannot depend on the agreement of everyone around you. There will always be someone who disagrees with your choices. There will always be someone who thinks you are too quiet, too ambitious, too distant, too focused, or too different. If you try to satisfy every person, you will eventually lose contact with yourself. You cannot build a strong identity while constantly asking other people who you should become. This does not mean that you should ignore every piece of advice. Wisdom means listening without becoming dependent. You can hear someone's opinion without allowing it to become your identity. You can accept criticism without immediately believing that something is wrong with you. You can respect someone without surrendering your own judgment. There is a difference between being considerate and needing approval. A mature person can say, I understand that you see it differently, but I have made my decision. There is no anger in that statement. There is no need to attack. There is no need to prove superiority. There is simply clarity. And clarity creates silence. When you know why you are doing something, you do not need to explain it 10 different ways. You can communicate your decision once, respectfully, and then allow people to have their own interpretation. This is especially important when someone intentionally misunderstands you. If a person has already decided to see you negatively, more explanations may not create understanding. They may only create more opportunities for arguments. The more you defend yourself, the more they ask for another explanation. Then another, and suddenly you are standing in front of someone trying to prove your worth. Why? Your worth was never theirs to decide. You do not become valuable because someone understands you. You do not become worthy because someone approves of your choices. Your value does not increase when people praise you, and it does not disappear when they criticize you. You must learn to stand quietly behind the person you are becoming. Some people will leave when you establish boundaries. Some will become uncomfortable when you stop explaining everything. Some may even accuse you of changing. And perhaps you have changed. Perhaps you have simply stopped abandoning yourself to keep other people comfortable. That is not selfishness. That is self-respect. The goal is not to become a person who never listens. The goal is to become a person who can listen without losing themselves, receive criticism without collapsing, and make decisions without needing permission from everyone around them. Because the moment you stop living for approval, you begin creating a life that actually belongs to you. There is a kind of strength that does not need to make noise. It does not demand attention. It does not argue. It does not try to prove that it is powerful. It simply remains calm when everything around it becomes chaotic. This is the strength of silence. Many people are afraid of silence because silence forces them to face themselves. When someone criticizes them, they immediately respond. When someone misunderstands them, they rush to explain. When someone provokes them, they feel compelled to defend themselves. They believe that having the last word means having the power. But often, the opposite is true. The person who can remain silent has already taken control of the situation. Silence gives you something that an immediate reaction cannot give you. Space. Space between what happens and how you respond. In that small space, you regain your ability to choose. You no longer become a prisoner of your first emotion. Someone says something hurtful. You pause. Someone tries to provoke you. You observe. Someone misunderstands your intentions. You breathe. And instead of reacting from anger, fear, or insecurity, you decide whether a response is even necessary. This is where silence becomes powerful. Silence does not mean that you are weak. It does not mean that you have nothing to say. Sometimes you remain silent because you understand that your words will not create understanding. Sometimes you remain silent because you know that arguing with someone who only wants to provoke you will only drain your energy. There are conversations that deserve your voice, and there are situations that deserve your silence. Wisdom is knowing the difference. When you constantly explain yourself, you communicate something without realizing it. That you need the other person to agree with you before you can feel secure about your decision. But when you become comfortable with silence, you begin telling yourself something different. I know why I made this choice. I know what I stand for. I do not need to convince everyone. That is inner strength. Think about how much energy is lost through unnecessary arguments. You replay conversations in your mind. You imagine what you should have said. You prepare responses to things that may never happen. You spend hours trying to prove that you were right. Meanwhile, your peace disappears. Silence breaks this cycle. It teaches you that not every statement requires a response. Not every accusation deserves a defense. Not every misunderstanding needs correction. Not every person deserves access to your emotional energy. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is nothing. Let your consistency speak. Let your behavior speak. Let your character speak. People may question your intentions today, but they cannot argue with years of consistent action. Words can be misunderstood. Actions are often much clearer. Silence also teaches patience. When emotions are intense, the mind becomes narrow. You see only the problem in front of you. You want to react immediately, because reacting feels like releasing pressure. But pressure does not disappear simply because you speak. Sometimes speaking, while angry, creates another problem that you must later repair. A pause can prevent that. A quiet moment can save you from words you cannot take back. This is why disciplined people do not respond to everything immediately. They create distance between emotion and action. They allow the mind to settle before deciding what deserves attention. And when they finally speak, their words carry more weight because they are not speaking from desperation. They are speaking from clarity. You do not need to become silent in every situation. There are moments when you must communicate, establish boundaries, defend someone, express your truth, or address a serious problem. But even then, you do not need unnecessary words. Say what needs to be said. Say it clearly. Say it respectfully, then stop. Do not keep adding explanations because you are afraid of being misunderstood. Do not keep arguing because the other person refuses to accept your answer. Do not keep proving your character to someone who has already decided what they want to believe. Your silence becomes powerful when it comes from self-respect rather than fear. You are not silent because you are afraid to speak. You are silent because you are no longer controlled by the need to react. And when you reach that point, silence stops being an absence of words and becomes a conscious choice to protect your peace, your attention, and the person you are becoming. Your energy is one of the most valuable things you possess, yet most people give it away without realizing it. They give it to arguments, opinions, criticism, gossip, misunderstandings, and people who have no intention of understanding them. They wake up with peace in their mind, and before the day is over, they have allowed someone else's words to control their emotions. You must learn to protect your energy. Not everything deserves your attention. Not every person deserves an explanation. Not every disagreement deserves a response. And not every misunderstanding deserves your emotional investment. When you constantly defend yourself, you may believe that you are protecting your reputation, but sometimes you are actually protecting an image that exists only in someone else's mind. Imagine someone misunderstands your decision. Your first instinct may be to explain. You tell them why you did it. They question you again. You provide another explanation. They find another reason to disagree. So you explain again. At some point, the conversation is no longer about understanding. It becomes about proving. And the moment you enter that cycle, you begin giving away your energy. You cannot control what another person chooses to believe about you. You can communicate your truth, but you cannot control how someone receives it. You can act with good intentions, but you cannot force another person to recognize those intentions. This is one of the hardest lessons of self-respect. You must accept that some people will misunderstand you. Let them. Some people will criticize your boundaries. Let them. Some people will create opinions about your life without knowing the full story. Let them. Your responsibility is not to correct every opinion. Your responsibility is to live in alignment with your values. When you stop trying to manage everyone else's perception of you, you recover an enormous amount of energy. That energy can go somewhere meaningful. You can use it to improve yourself. You can use it to build your future. You can use it to strengthen your body, discipline your mind, develop your skills, spend time with people who genuinely matter, and create a life that does not depend on constant approval. This is why protecting your energy is not selfish. It is necessary. If you spend all your energy responding to other people, you have very little left for yourself. Think about how often you replay a negative conversation. Someone says something about you, and hours later you are still thinking about it. You imagine what you should have said. You create arguments in your head. You become angry at conversations that are already finished. But the other person may have already forgotten. You are carrying something they dropped. Put it down. You do not have to carry every opinion that is placed on your shoulders. There will always be people who try to pull you into emotional reactions. Sometimes they do it intentionally. Sometimes they do not even realize they are doing it. Either way, you have a choice. You can react or you can remain centered. You can allow their behavior to determine your emotional state, or you can decide that your peace is more important. This does not mean becoming indifferent to everyone. It means becoming selective about what deserves your energy. A mature person understands that attention is a form of investment. Where you place your attention, you place your life. If you constantly focus on people who disrespect you, you give them more space in your life than they deserve. If you constantly focus on criticism, you strengthen the voice of your critics inside your own mind. If you constantly focus on proving yourself, you forget to actually become the person you want to be. So protect your attention, protect your peace, protect your time. You do not need to announce every boundary you create. You can simply begin living differently. Respond less. Observe more, explain when necessary. Remain silent when explanation becomes justification. Walk away when a conversation becomes destructive. And most importantly, stop confusing emotional exhaustion with responsibility. You are not responsible for making everyone comfortable with your choices. You are not responsible for convincing everyone that you are a good person. You are responsible for your actions, your words, your intentions, and the way you treat others. The rest must be released. The more carefully you protect your energy, the more clearly you begin to hear your own thoughts. You become less reactive. You become more focused. You become less dependent on external approval. And slowly, you realize that peace is not something other people give you. Peace is something you protect by deciding what you will and will not allow to occupy your mind. There is a point in your life when you realize that words are not always the strongest way to communicate who you are. You can tell people that you are disciplined, but your habits will reveal whether you are. You can tell people that you are trustworthy, but your actions will show whether they can rely on you. You can explain your intentions for hours, but eventually your behavior will speak louder than everything you said. This is why you must learn to let your actions speak. When you constantly explain yourself, you may become dependent on words to prove your character. You tell people why you deserve respect. You explain why your intentions were good. You defend your decisions. You describe the person you are trying to become. But there is another way. Become that person. Do not spend your life announcing your discipline. Practice it quietly. Do not tell everyone that you are changing. Change. Do not repeatedly explain your boundaries. Live according to them. Do not tell people that you have become stronger. Let them notice the difference in the way you respond. Real transformation does not need constant advertisement. Think about a person who exercises every morning without telling anyone. They do not need to announce every workout. Their consistency eventually becomes visible. The same principle applies to character. When you become more patient, people will experience it. When you become more disciplined, your results will reveal it. When you become more confident, you will no longer need to demand respect. When you become emotionally mature, people will notice that you no longer react to every provocation. Your actions become evidence. And evidence does not need a long explanation. This is especially important when someone doubts you. When someone tells you that you cannot change, your first instinct may be to prove them wrong with words. You want to tell them what you are going to accomplish. You want them to understand your vision. But you do not need to convince them. Build quietly. Work quietly. Improve quietly. Then allow the results to speak. There is tremendous power in becoming comfortable with being underestimated. When people do not believe in you, you do not need to fight for their belief. You can use their doubt as a reminder to focus on your own path. Because if you spend your time proving yourself to everyone, you are no longer focused on becoming better. You are focused on being seen as better. Those are two completely different things. One is growth. The other is performance. And a meaningful life requires growth. Your actions also protect you from unnecessary explanations. When your behavior is consistent over time, you no longer need to defend every isolated moment. One mistake does not define you when your character consistently demonstrates something different. One misunderstanding does not destroy your identity when your actions continue to reflect your values. This is why consistency is so powerful. Anyone can say the right words for one day. Anyone can make a promise. Anyone can create an impressive explanation. But very few people can demonstrate the same character repeatedly when nobody is watching. That is where true strength is built. You do not need to convince people that you are disciplined if you wake up and do the work. You do not need to convince people that you are peaceful if you remain calm when challenged. You do not need to convince people that you respect yourself if you know when to walk away from what repeatedly disrespects you. Your life becomes the message. This does not mean you should never communicate. There are moments when clear communication is necessary. If someone deserves an explanation, give one. If you have made a mistake, take responsibility. If your actions have hurt someone, apologize sincerely. But once you have communicated honestly, stop trying to control the response. You cannot force someone to accept your apology. You cannot force someone to trust you immediately. You cannot force someone to understand your growth. Let time reveal what words cannot. Let consistency rebuild what promises cannot. Let your behavior become the quiet evidence of who you are. And remember that the goal is not to make other people notice your transformation. The goal is to transform. If people notice, fine. If they do not, continue. If they praise you, remain grounded. If they doubt you, remain focused. Because when your identity is built on your actions, external opinions lose their ability to control you. You no longer need to announce every step. You simply take the next one. You no longer need to explain every change. You allow your life to demonstrate it. And eventually, without saying much at all, the person you have become will speak for you in ways that no explanation ever could. Self-respect begins with the way you speak to yourself when nobody else is listening. It begins with the decisions you make when there is no applause, no recognition, and no one around to tell you that you are doing the right thing. Many people believe confidence comes from being admired, accepted, or respected by others. But if your sense of worth depends entirely on external approval, then your confidence will always be fragile. One person's praise can lift you up, and one person's criticism can bring you down. One person's acceptance can make you feel valuable, while one person's rejection can make you question everything about yourself. This is not inner strength. This is dependence. True self-respect begins when you stop asking other people for permission to value yourself. You do not need permission to have boundaries. You do not need permission to walk away from what repeatedly harms your peace. You do not need permission to change your direction. You do not need permission to become a different version of yourself. And you certainly do not need permission to stop explaining your life to people who have already chosen not to understand it. Self-respect does not mean believing that you are better than others. It means understanding that you are responsible for how you allow yourself to be treated and how you treat yourself. If you repeatedly betray your own values just to keep someone else happy, something inside you becomes weaker. You say yes when you want to say no. You remain silent when you need to speak. You stay where you should leave. You accept disrespect because you are afraid of being alone. You explain yourself endlessly because you are afraid someone might judge you. Every time you abandon your own truth to gain approval, you teach yourself that someone else's comfort is more important than your own integrity. Self-respect asks you to stop doing that. It asks you to become honest with yourself. What do you actually want? What do you truly believe? What are you no longer willing to tolerate? What kind of person do you want to become? These questions are uncomfortable because they force you to stop living automatically. But once you answer them, you begin to build something stronger than confidence. You build trust in yourself. And self-trust changes everything. When you trust yourself, you do not need constant reassurance. You can make a decision and stand behind it. You can make a mistake and learn from it without destroying your identity. You can receive criticism without immediately questioning your worth. You become steady. Not because life becomes easier, but because you become less dependent on the outside world to tell you who you are. This is also why silence becomes connected to self-respect. When you respect yourself, you stop feeling obligated to respond to every accusation. You stop chasing people who constantly misunderstand you. You stop begging for recognition from people who refuse to give it. You understand that some doors are better left closed. Some conversations are better left unfinished. Some relationships are better released. And some opinions are better ignored. Not because you are cruel, but because you finally understand the value of your own peace. Self-respect also means keeping promises to yourself. If you say you will change a habit, take the first step. If you say you will protect your time, protect it. If you say you will stop returning to what repeatedly breaks your peace, keep your distance. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you strengthen your relationship with yourself. Every time you break one for the sake of temporary approval, you weaken that relationship. So begin quietly. Do not announce your boundaries. Practice them. Do not tell everyone that you are becoming stronger. Become stronger. Do not demand that people respect you. Start by respecting yourself. There will be people who do not understand your silence. There will be people who call your boundaries selfish. There will be people who become uncomfortable when you stop explaining yourself. Allow them to have their opinions. You do not need to fight every battle. You only need to remain loyal to your values, because the deepest form of confidence is not standing in front of others and saying, "Look at me." It is standing alone and being able to say, "I know who I am, and I will not abandon myself just to be accepted." That is the point where approval loses its power. That is the point where silence becomes peaceful instead of uncomfortable. That is the point where walking away becomes an act of wisdom rather than defeat. And that is the point where self-respect becomes more important than being understood, more valuable than being praised, and more powerful than the temporary comfort of fitting into someone else's expectations.